All right, doing well. That's awesome. How did you guys like Khanna? You appreciated what he had to say? That's great. All right, so we're now moving to the panel portion of the evening. I'm going to start with you. I'm just going to allow the panel to briefly. Well, actually, you know what I should probably do? I should probably just like read the. Set it up. Set the stage. Right? Okay, I'm going to set the stage for the panel, and then we'll briefly do introductions. Then I'll ask questions. We'll do about 40 minutes or so, and at the end of it, we'll also have like 15 minutes of questions from you guys. Okay, so. Starting and growing a business in America is an all-consuming effort, with entrepreneurs and small business founders often pouring everything, physically, financially, emotionally, into their businesses in an effort to turn their dreams into a reality. Since 2010, Fiverr has been a resource for those business builders when it comes to the nuts and bolts of their organizations. However, Fiverr also recognizes the large role that the business and political environment plays in the opportunities, challenges, and concerns of entrepreneurs across the U.S. So in an effort to gain a better understanding of what issues are propelling American small businesses and entrepreneurs forward, and also the ones that are holding them back as well, the policies that are holding them back sometimes, Fiverr recently issued a report that examined the opinions of 1,000 U.S. marketplace customers on big economic issues, startup roadblocks and costs, and safety net issues. So, with this information, a more complete picture emerges of what's driving and stalling American entrepreneurialism and small business growth. I encourage you to grab a copy if you haven't gotten a copy yet of the report and check it out. I'm also excited to be here today with this distinguished panel to talk about these very issues and to chart a path forward on what we can do to help entrepreneurs thrive and succeed in the U.S. So, all right, Brent, we'll start with you. Go ahead and introduce yourself.
Yep, very briefly, I'm Brent Messenger. I am the Global Head of Community. I was, you might remember me from my job as the MC for the first part of this, and a beer taster. But I'm glad to be here, and thanks for coming.
I'm Natalie Foster. I am an advisor to the Aspen Institute Future of Work Initiative, and also co-chair a new organization called the Economic Security Project, and live in Oakland.
And you have a booming voice too.
For projection. I'm Mariah Lichtenstern. I'm your resident founder for the evening. I'm the founder of Shares and DiverseCity Ventures.
Awesome. Okay, we'll start with you, Brent. We will go into, so tell us more about the report on entrepreneurialism in America. Congratulations on that, by the way. And also, why did you guys do that deep dive into these issues?
Yeah, so I was thinking about it. I was actually talking with Carla about this before the last segment about why we did it, and really the reason is, and I think actually Congressman Khanna hit on this too a little bit. There are large sectors of the economy that have been talked about a lot, particularly during the last election cycle and up to now. Whether that are that would be manufacturers, people working in the Rust Belt, or coal miners, or whatever they happen to be. And a lot of people talking about small business, and it's interesting because there are 28 million small business owners in America, 23 million non-employer small businesses, very small businesses in the United States. And I think because they're not geographically in one place or monolithic in a lot of different ways, they're not talked about. So we wanted to learn what we could about that group who happen to be our customers, and hopefully give them voice. So that's why we did it.
What are some of the more interesting, high-level findings that you can spout out?
Yeah, so you could read through it. I mean, the report, but what we did for the report was we kind of tried to bucket these things into sort of three major buckets. We had prioritizing startup roadblocks. We had big economic issues, and then we had safety net issues. And those, in startup roadblocks, it was like access to capital, education, training, access to expertise. Those were the kinds of things that were there. Under social safety net, or safety nets, it was benefits, student loan reform, healthcare access. And then, I'm kind of flipping through my notes here, under big economic issues, cost of living, enforcing antitrust, competition, trade, tax reform, things like that. So it's a comprehensive study, but the things that stuck out to me that I found most interesting were that, for example, in the big economic issues category, the biggest priority, the thing that small business people think about the most, was cost of living. It's not surprising, but it's sort of right there in front of us, and we don't talk about it all the time. The thing that really stuck out to me in that category, though, was trade. So you hear a lot about trade. Khanna talked about trade earlier. 7% of respondents thought that trade was an issue that impacted them on a daily basis. So it makes for great campaign politics, but when the rubber hits the road, it's not what entrepreneurs, at least that use Fiverr, are thinking about. Similarly, access to startup capital. That was the biggest roadblock for entrepreneurs. And if you add to that access to expand for capital for expansion, another 12%. So it's well over 50%. On the other hand, the very lowest priority in the options that we gave to them, regulations. So you hear all the time, and politicians talk about this all the time when it's political season. Regulations are strangling small business. When it comes to day-to-day thinking about their business, regulations not the thing they're thinking about the most. So for me, those are two things that stood out.
Awesome. We'll ask some more questions about that in the next several minutes. All right, moving on to the opening question for Natalie. So you're an expert on the future of work, the gig economy. What are some of the top, let's just cut to the chase on 2 to 3 big trends that people should be looking out for if they want to participate in the gig economy?
Yeah, so how many people here have earned money on a digital labor platform like Fiverr? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, so about 10 of us. That is, I think if I have my math right, somewhat representative of the overall labor market. It's still very small, the digital gig economy. About 0.5% of the labor market, according to the JP Chase Institute, has ever actually participated in earning income on a digital labor platform. But what's shocking and exciting is that it is growing. So in the past 3 years, you've seen a 46x growth across the American cities, according to the same JP Chase Institute study. And what was interesting about that study, by the way, is they analyzed people's bank accounts. So it wasn't just self-reported off what people, are guessing they did. It's actually what was coming into their accounts. So that type of growth is the growth that venture capitalists and others look at when they are determining if this is something I should take seriously. And so I think from a policy perspective, you can be sure that what the gig economy represents is something that will be a big part of the future of work, and frankly sits inside a much larger trend in the workforce, which is the trend of alternative work. So people who are self-employed, small business owners, including standard part-time, people who are part-time employees, 1099 workers, independent contractors. The GAO says that 40% of the American labor force has some form of alternative work, whether it's their primary or secondary source of income. So that's a big chunk of the American workforce. And the thing I think we'll talk about tonight is that's also people working outside of the social safety net that we set up to support people in working. That flows through employers. So if you work outside of traditional employment, paid time off, workers' comp, unemployment insurance, those kinds of things are not actually available to you. So I think one of the big questions is how do we make sure a social safety net, how do we make a safety net for the 21st century that really covers all types of work, no matter how it's done.
Awesome. Okay, yeah, we'll definitely be asking some questions on the social safety net as well. All right, Mariah Lichtenstern, your turn. So I talked with you about your story a lot backstage, and you are a badass. So she is, yeah. So I just want to. So you are now the founder of DiverseCity Ventures and CineShares. So let's hear about both of those, but also just tell us a little bit about your story too, and then. Then I want to ask you about how some of these larger issues are affecting you now, or affecting people you work with, etc. But go ahead. All of that, have fun.
Okay, it's definitely, they definitely do tie into my entrepreneurial journey. So yes, I am the founder of DiverseCity Ventures. And first of all, thank you Fiverr, thank you General Assembly. It's such a privilege to be here, and I'm very excited about this report and the fact that it's being used as a catalyst to impact policy that empowers entrepreneurs. So thank you for that. So yes, I'm the founder of DiverseCity Ventures, which is an impact-oriented venture capital firm. We're focused on ventures that have social, economic, and environmental impact. Part of that social aspect includes discovering and empowering underrepresented founders by virtue of not only gender and ethnicity, but geography and socioeconomic status. So, I certainly, between that and being, I'm a graduate of the Founder Institute Silicon Valley. I'm a co-director of the new Sacramento chapter, mentor and judge for organizations like University, and sit on tech advisory committees, steering committees in the tech community. So I do encounter a lot of entrepreneurs And this is something that I'm really, really passionate about. And then also as a founder of Cineshares, I interact with filmmakers who I consider artistic entrepreneurs. And you talk about gig economy. And so my entrepreneurial journey really began as an undergrad at UC Berkeley, but I think your question really goes to, it requires context for that. So I come from a middle class background. My mother was a director of nursing. She became disabled when I was very young and went on disability. And so that, that relegated us to a very low income bracket. We went from middle class to like very low income. And so, I didn't even think that college was an opportunity for me, but ultimately, I did go to college, and that was really the highest aspiration that my family had for me, is to go to college and get a good job. And just, speaking of healthcare and safety net, when you're on disability, you have to spend down all of your assets. You cannot invest in real estate. If you make beyond a certain level of income, which is relatively small, you lose your benefits, including health care. And so, you cannot take a risk there at all. So I really was not exposed to entrepreneurship. It wasn't something that was modeled, but I was entrepreneurial in a lot of ways, and I knew that my family expected me to go to college. So I did very well academically, did honors and AP classes. I also worked 20 to 30 hours per week through high school, but I was the president of Future Business Leaders of America. And I took the only computer science class that we had. And I ultimately, I had the drive and the stamina to be entrepreneurial, but I didn't really have the examples. And I didn't have that support or models until my third year at Cal. So at UC Berkeley, I was there during the height of the dot-com boom, and it was also the height of the bubble. Now, I had gone into foster care at 14, emancipated at 17. So because of that, I got access to the Cal Grant A and B. So I didn't have to pay fees, right? UC don't charge tuition, but they have like thousands and thousands of dollars in fees. So the Cal Grant A and B, covered my fees, but it didn't cover books. It didn't cover cost of living, which was very exorbitant in the Bay Area at the time, which, again, tech boom. And so I had to max out my student loans, and that certainly impacted my entrepreneurial journey, but I maxed out student loans and worked 20 to 30 hours per week. So, it was about, I was a liberal arts major, but I was exposed to an investment banker, someone who worked in investment banking, who gave me the book Cash Flow Quadrant. It was my first time seeing financial statements, my first time considering entrepreneurship as a pathway. Now, I had been studying representations of people of color in media. The lack of representation was tied to who controls the media and ownership of our cultural product. It was the Napster era. Prince and Michael Jackson were lobbying for rights, to be free of their record labels. So there was a disruption in the tech industry that I felt could be applied for economic empowerment, essentially, in this demographic that had been disempowered. And so I took an interest in tech, I took an interest in entrepreneurship, and I would say that I definitely had a conscientiousness about how tech and entrepreneurship and policy were interrelated, particularly, and Khanna mentioned this, as it pertains to communities that have been historically disenfranchised economically. So I've always had a consciousness of that. I've been conscious of both the opportunities entrepreneurship affords, but also the barriers to entry.
All right, we're going to definitely talk more about that in not too long. And but now we're going to move back to Brent. Thank you for that. And you said you were going to be nervous. Oh my God, you're excellent. So, all right, moving to Brent. So, tell us more about the survey. It's 1,000 US-based marketplace customers. So, what did you find out about the group? And how do you think their experience reflect more broadly on the state of American entrepreneurship today?
Yeah, that's interesting. So yeah, it was 1,000 Fiverr customers. That means people who purchased things on Fiverr over the last 6 months on a regular basis. So that's kind of how we made the cut. One of the things that we learned right away, and it was kind of one of the things I mentioned in my first answer, was that they're not in one place. So they were all over the country. They were a little bit heavier in California. They were a little bit heavier in the South because of Texas and Florida. But they were everywhere, and they weren't just rural. They were urban, and so that means that they represent a wide range of demographics, a wide range of ethnicities, political persuasions, everything you can imagine. So they were not monolithic, which is the one thing I mentioned at the beginning. We also learned that these people are very small businesses. I mean, 46% were one person, 41% were 2 to 5 people. Yet they identify, this was kind of fascinating to me, they identify overwhelmingly, like 90% identify as either small business people or entrepreneurs. That's how they saw themselves. They were small business people, whether or not they were working by themselves or with somebody else. And then lastly, they were working online. So these are heavy internet users, right? So 45% of them had businesses that were online only. So really, I mean, one of the big takeaways for me was just that entrepreneurship is shifting. This is not raise a lot of capital, open a brick and mortar business anymore. This is, you can do a lot of different things, you can try a lot of different things out. You don't need to live in a city. If you have access to, to broadband and a good idea, you can start a business, you can be a one-person business, and that one-person business can be a sustainable, real business contributing to the economy to be one of these 28 million or 23 million non-employer businesses that makes serious contributions to the economy. So.
For sure. So a lot of those people are gig economy folks. We'll move on over to Natalie, who can talk about the gig, but we can all talk about the gig economy, I guess, at some point or another. But you're the one with bona fides on actually knowing what's going on. So it's growing fast. Why is it growing so fast? What are the promises and perils of it? What do you think, the fact that it's growing so fast, what do you think that portends for the future?
Yeah. So, there's a number of reasons that we've seen people find work in the gig economy. One is the flexibility piece that I think a lot of entrepreneurs, people who identify as entrepreneurs, see in what they want. So I want work that I can do on my own hours. I want to be my own boss. I want to set my own wages in a place like Fiverr, less so on a platform like Uber. But I want that flexibility. Another thing we've heard a lot is people looking for supplemental income. So people have a regular job where they have a steady source of income, and then they want to supplement it either for something elective, like a trip they're saving up for, or because of the rising cost of living, which sounds like was a really big part of what you found in the Fiverr community. And then another reason is just people who are out of the labor market, not by choice, who are between things and are making income in that way. And so I think those are all reasons why the gig economy is growing. I also think, and Khanna mentioned this too, over the last 40 years, we've seen wages across the board stagnate. American growth has been phenomenal in the last 40 years. Economic growth has gone like this, and wages have gone like this. And at the same time, in the past 10 years, we know for 2/3 of American household wages have gone down. They make less than they did 10 years ago. So that's another reason that I think these secondary sources of income are really growing. But I also think the first one is important too, which is that people are looking for there are many people who are looking for something different in their work and want something that is on their terms because of family or other reasons, and that's an important one too.
Okay, cool. Startup roadblocks and costs. So we're going to do a couple of questions on that. We'll go to you, Mariah, first, then we'll go to you, Natalie. So, Mariah, what are some of your most pressing concerns around startup costs and roadblocks? I'm also wondering the single greatest challenge you face starting up and operating a business yourself around this area. Financial, regulatory, something else.
Okay, so I would say, and the report shows this, obviously access to capital is huge. And just to contextualize, you made a really great point right now about, profits have gone up, but wages have stagnated. And so that erodes our consumer base. It also erodes our ability to own homes, build equity, invest in our own businesses. So access to capital is huge. I read a study recently that 30% of Americans had $500 or less in case of emergency, 20% had nothing. This is real. 50% of Americans live paycheck to paycheck. So, maybe for 50% of Americans, they have a corporate track or they come from a more privileged background, but 50% of Americans are income insecure. That is huge. So I would say, of course, access to capital. Now, for me, as an undergrad, when I started my first business, which is a boutique production company as an undergrad, after reading this cash flow quadrant book, and
what's the book called?
Cash Flow Quadrant by Robert Kiyosaki, and it basically breaks down the left and right side. Left side being employee, self-employed where you're dependent on your own labor, and the right side being entrepreneur, or more specifically business owner and investor where your money works for you. So that was a real paradigm shift and opened my eyes to the opportunity in economic development and economic parity, social justice through entrepreneurship. But of course, you still have to have access to capital to start a business. So I'm from the Bay Area, I'm a native, and we have the stories of like Too Short, who started selling his CDs out of the trunk. But you hear these stories of like entrepreneurs from the community that I come from, and I'm multi-ethnic, so I come from a lot of communities. But when you look at underrepresented, specifically communities, the people who have made it through the hegemony have done things like Jay-Z sold drugs, right? So why are they doing that? To get startup capital. It's not like they wanted to sell drugs. They wanted to start a legitimate business. Okay, so I've gone on a tangent there, but access to startup capital obviously was a challenge, and for me, I was privileged going to Berkeley. I was privileged, but I had to take this student debt, and I started my company, bought equipment and software with my loan refund. That's right. And that was a risk because that was my, that was subsidizing my 20 to 30 hours per week working, with the cost of living, right? So I did that, and fortunately I was successful and able to not have to work 20 to 30 hours per week, which allowed me to take on internships, take the GRE, study for the GRE, and apply to grad school, which I would not have been able to do if I had to continue working 20 to 30 hours per week. But that was my startup capital, and not everybody, obviously has access to that. And you're also taking on a debt burden, which then, later on in life, affected, my debt to income ratio, affected my ability to buy a home. That's right. Fortunately, my husband came here as an immigrant on scholarship. And so, he didn't have that same DTI. We were able to buy a home and build equity, and we'll, probably touch maybe a little bit on that later, but access to capital is huge. And just a couple things I'd like to throw out there. Richard Kirby of Venrock put out a report, Who is a VC? And it breaks down the demographics, gender and ethnically, of who are investment partners. I mean, we're in the venture capital of the world, right? We have more access to capital here than any place else. But when you look at that report, when you look at Chamath Palihapitiya's report, Bros Funding Bros, when you look at Catherine Finney's Project Diane that says that less than 0.2% of venture capital goes to Black female founders, when you look at the past few weeks, what's come out about the sexual harassment that women have faced, then it begins to tear down this notion of meritocracy. It's not just a meritocracy, right? It is an elitism, it is a network, and people who are in different geographies don't have access to that network. And it's not easy for someone from Kentucky to move to Silicon Valley, and why should they leave their mom and their dad and whomever else to come here? So I think policy-wise, access to capital is huge. I think in terms of economic development, there's a lot that we can do to de-risk entrepreneurship. And of course it's huge, it's been huge for me. It's part of the reason why I started DiverseCity Ventures, to create more access to capital and disrupt the model of venture capital so that people who are subject to the wealth gap, which is more of an ethnic impact, right? Or the income inequality that we're facing, which is class-oriented, right? That they're not excluded on the basis of that. If you have a brilliant idea and you have the skill and you have the grit and you have the entrepreneurial DNA, you should not be limited by network, geography, socioeconomic status, gender, ethnicity. And so, obviously, yes, I can say capital is huge.
Awesome, thank you for that. All right, so going to talk about cost of living, which is very related to all this. We're going to go to you, Natalie. So 60% of the Fiverr respondents in the survey indicated that the cost of living is making it harder on them to actually be successful and to run their business. Now, that concern is felt across both urban communities and rural communities. So what are some of the ways our leaders can address this problem?
Yeah, well, first of all, you should run for office.
Get the money first.
Access to capital, right? No, but I think that's exactly, this also mirrors what we're seeing in California. Study after study show this is now the top the top concern for Californians. It's just cost of living, cost of living, cost of living. And it makes a lot of sense because, we talked about that wage gap, and that's really serious. That's 40 years worth of wages based on economic growth that did not go to American households. They went to a very small percentage of this economy, and that is going to continue to grow because that means that's who can invest in homes or not. That's who can invest in other, asset-bearing or financial-bearing assets. So I think that's a real question. One of the things that Khanna talked about I think is really important, which is income support. So he actually put forward a bill, he talked about $1 trillion bill to expand the earned income tax credit. And this is something as the future, when we think about the future of work, I think we have to think about wages. So things like the Fight for 15 are really important in raising wages to where they need to be or getting it closer to where they need to be. But I think we also have to look at other forms of income that people deserve. So the earned income tax credit being an example of that. One of the biggest tools we have for fighting poverty. It says if you make below a certain amount, the government will make sure that you receive, some income back. So you can imagine expanding that even bigger. And I think that's why a lot of this talk around the universal basic income is growing too, is saying that people deserve an income regardless of what happens with their job and their work life. And so I think there's a lot of energy there.
Okay, so we're going to move on to Mariah again, actually. I'm going to get to an Affordable Care Act question for you, Brent, but I want to hear, but Mariah's got to say something. No, so my question is about, has the cost of living affected your ability to run a business? Has it affected, talk about the people who you work with and how that affects their ability to run a business. Also, what are some things that can be done to alleviate the challenges that you're facing around affordability short of actually moving? Remember that question.
Yes, I'm going to challenge that last part because I think, we look at Silicon Valley and I've heard many investors say it's Mecca and tell people whether it's accelerators or, VC that you have to be here. I mean, we have a capacity. We have a housing shortage. I mean, these are real issues. So I think there's a point where the network effects that are so magical in the Bay Area. I love the Bay, it's my home. But there's a point where the network effects become network defects. Yep. And we have to diversify. And really, come on, we're one earthquake away from this being gone. Let's just be realistic.
It could be difficult, yeah. We could recover quicker than electricity, but we'll see.
I don't know. Let's not go there. Anyway, absolutely. Cost of living. In fact, before I went to grad school in Los Angeles, which is another high cost of living city, I had a 2-bedroom apartment that I shared in Oakland. The rent went up from $925 to $1,400, and I said, hey, I can do 12, but I can't do 14. And my landlord said, no, I'm not going to do that. And it was a new landlord, just bought the property, raised the rent 40%. The law was 3%. Ended up filing a lawful detainer against me, which stayed on my record for 10 years. Okay, wow. Talk about policy here. Even though we went to court and he could not evict me, obviously, and I saved all my money for rent and everything, and he actually didn't even raise the rent. But yeah, that was a huge stress factor. So cost of living is huge. And again, like if you're coming from a smaller area where the cost of living is lower, it's very hard to transplant here. So for me personally, I didn't move because of cost of living. I went to grad school in LA and ended up back in Sacramento where my mother retired and ended up buying a house there at the bottom of the market. And that has kept my overhead low, and I'm able, I've been commuting since I was 16 years old to go see my mom from here. So, I come out here many times per month for meetings and whatnot, but my cost of living is much lower in Sacramento. And I mean, how many can afford to buy a home here? Even engineers are complaining we can't buy homes, and people come from other states where that's part of their culture to,
And they have to move, yeah.
Exactly, and so that's, a challenge. You have to live in the suburbs and you have to commute and deal with traffic and congestion. So actually, there is a member of an economic development group out here who is working with us in Sacramento and part of the Greater Sacramento Economic Council, and we're providing incentives for startups to come out there. Where you can afford a home, and we do provide tax breaks and other incentives. I'm also, like I said, running the Fiverr and Institute, which is in 60 countries, 170 cities, and we're empowering entrepreneurs where they are and giving them access to our network. It's headquartered in Silicon Valley. So I think that moving or relocation should not be off the table. I think we need to diversify and globalize Silicon Valley.
Okay, great. Thank you, Mariah. Appreciate that. All right, so we have less than 5 minutes till we start to take you guys' questions. So just a few minutes we will get to, not just yet though. So I'm going to do a couple more questions. I want you guys to also wrap things up and give people an idea of how they can find out more about what you're doing, etc. But first, I do want to ask about safety net issues from you two. The Affordable Care Act is something that the Fiverr CEO has come out as the company in general is a proponent of. So if you could go ahead and speak to that, tell us why that is an important issue for Fiverr.
Yeah, I mean, I'll keep it super brief. It's simple. I mean, Fiverr is going to support anything that allows people to take risks and pursue passions. The ACA was not perfect, is not perfect, but it does provide people the opportunity to take a risk. And as it turns out, a lot of Fiverr community members have accessed the exchanges to buy their healthcare, protected, we have healthcare under Medicare or Medicaid, or protected in other ways under the Act. So for us, very straightforward, our community likes it, it spurs entrepreneurialism, we support it, period.
Okay, great. So sort of where do we go from here? End of the section here. I wanted, end of the panel. I guess we're getting close to the end of this portion of the panel. Natalie, so what's the most important thing our policymakers can do to help entrepreneurs succeed? I'm sort of skipping to the last question I wanted to ask you. So what can audience members do to facilitate that change?
Well, when we passed the Affordable Care Act 9 years ago, and I was working for the president at the DNC at the time with a couple of other folks, Jim Pugh, you were probably around after having helped elect him. And we nervously watched the vote that night, much like I did a few weeks ago, nervously watching the vote, a very different context. And what happened 9 years ago, almost 10 years ago, was that we passed what was actually the first future of work policy of this new era. We just didn't know it then. And what it did was allow anyone, regardless of their work, to access health insurance. Prior to that, it was all through your employer. And it was very hard to get outside of, and very unregulated to get outside of an employer. And that meant that entrepreneurs, anyone who is a small business owner, anyone that did not exist, the gig economy yet, would really be locked out of health insurance. And so I think we need to see more policies like that extend what has traditionally been the safety net, paid time off, parental leave, sick leave, not to mention unemployment insurance and workers' comp and disability, that all live inside employers to people no matter where they are and how they work. And that employers will always have a responsibility to pay for that, but that it should live with the worker and move with them from job to job. It should be portable in that way, and that it should be prorated. If I do 6 hours of work here and 12 hours of work here, that it all adds up to my paid time off account, for example. And that it should be universal, that there's not multiple classes of employees, that anyone who works has access to the safety net. And that's the kind of policy that I think we're going to have to start to prototype in cities and states, and ultimately have a federal change.
Okay, Natalie, thank you for that. All right, Mariah, really quickly, so what's next for you and your business? And if people want to access your services, how can they do that?
How many in here are entrepreneurs? Right on. Okay, so we are at DiverseCity, CITYB.com. We're on Twitter. You can contact us and submit your business plans. We're trying to be much more democratic about how we look at our deal flow. With CineShares, if you're a filmmaker, you can go to cineshares.com, CINEshares.com. We are launching some innovative beta programs, such as the Fundrapreneur program, where we are helping entrepreneurs that may not have access to friends and family that are wealthy to get access to capital that's non-dilutive. So, yeah.
All right, great. And Brent, going forward, what role does Fiverr see itself playing in helping you grow and support entrepreneurship in the U.S. and
Yeah, no, that's a great question. So, I mean, first and foremost, Fiverr is a platform that, we say this all the time, that we believe democratizes services for entrepreneurs, meaning services that they previously couldn't afford or couldn't get because they were only through large companies or agencies can be now purchased, at a much more affordable price for entrepreneurs who are starting out. Anything an entrepreneur needs, you can find. So in that way, we've democratized these services. Beyond that, though, and that's our business. Beyond that, now we're doing things like this report and we're going to be doing more and more advocacy, working with people like Natalie to try to find the right answers to all these really complex questions, and being a champion for them, as you mentioned. Mika Kaufman and myself at Fiverr have been outspoken on ACA, and we'll continue to be loud on behalf of entrepreneurs and small business people.
Okay, sounds good. All right, so we will now take questions from the audience. Remember with the questions, try to make them questions primarily and not so much a big statement that goes on and on and on. All right, go for it, sir.
Thank you. Okay, to me, the big elephant in the room is that, thank you, is that this new on-demand work gig economy is a marketplace. And Americans have to realize they're marketers, and that what I'd like you guys to help clarify for people is that there's two sides to this coin. There are haves and have-nots. There are people not good marketers, they post and nothing happens, okay? Those are the have-nots. The marketing can come from this economy, from Fiverr. So you can find good marketing help on Fiverr, and then you use that to market your other gig, you know, your gig on the other side of your small business. Could you help clarify for people that this is really kind of what broke the small business market, but it's also what can put it back together?
Yeah, I mean, I think what you're talking about essentially is the need for training and for people to really understand how to use these marketplaces better. I mean, something that we do a lot of at Fiverr and are going to continue to do more of is teaching people how to be both, you know, for lack of a better term, a buyer and a seller in the marketplace. There are a lot of people who are both, as you pointed out, who may have a service that they also buy another service to then market. I mean, it's a little complicated, it's a little new, and it's something that we hope in the future we can teach people how to be better at. That's a quick answer.
All right, we'll move on to, do you guys, either of you guys have anything? So you guys are okay, we're fine. All right, let's go with you right now.
Hi, do any of you envision creating new work categories in the future, changing the concept of a 40-hour week or anything like that? You know, changing from 1099s and W-2s into, I don't know, W3, W4, W4.5, whatever, to be able to adapt to this new gig economy and allowing individual persons to have multiple employers in a way, you know, like, which is not common right now. And also have protections for them, for that kind of thing.
Yeah, I think that is one of, I think, the big questions of the future of work is how do you build in protections in a very disaggregated workplace, right? If my workplace is actually my living room and I bring in streams of income from a variety of places, what do protections look like? So in terms of classification, this is like a buzzword in the tiny little future of work circles. Should there be a new classification of worker, a dependent worker, somebody who works on a platform and is dependent upon the platform for marketing and other things that you're pointing out, but you know, still has flexibility and freedom? And I actually think the answer is no. I don't think we need new classifications of worker. I actually think we might need one classification of worker, like one type of worker, and that no matter how you do work and how you earn income, you're protected, and that there is a way in which you can access, you know, parental leave and sick leave when you need it. All the things that built the American middle class, that made sure you had access to capital if something terrible happened to you on disability, or you know, made sure that you could take time off when you have a baby. And so I want that for every type of worker. I don't want to create new types of categories that then makes it just a lot more work for lawyers.
All right, okay, did you want to speak, either of you guys, on that? You're good? Okay. Sorry.
Hello, how are you? Thank you for having me, and congrats, Mariah. We're glad to hear and support you. My question is we hear a juxtaposition kind of opposite, talking about UBI and her work with entrepreneurship and increasing diversity deal flow. Mariah, I would like to maybe you address Ms. Foster. How do you think there could be more diversity and equity and solutions building in the universal basic income solution as entrepreneurship being a solution to UBI? And what does that look like in kind of breaking down those Jim Crow frameworks in the UBI discussion?
That's a hard question.
You know, it's interesting though, yesterday I was in the office of Attorney James Sweeney across from the Capitol, and he has a picture with Martin Luther King in a speech that he gave at Stanford, and it included his proposal about a universal basic income, and that was like 1968. And so I think there's a lot to explore there. But in terms of what you were saying about diversity, I mean, we have to address the fact that there is an income inequality, and that there is a wealth gap that comes from the historical policies of our country. It just is what it is, and we can't act like it doesn't exist and that it's just going to go away without some kind of reparation or remediation. I think one of the ways that we can address that is with economic development policies, and we're one of the co-directors of the Fiverr Institute in Sacramento works in economic development. I'm becoming more involved in that. I haven't been very active politically, but I'm trying to become more conscious of that living in the capital. And I think that we can create incentives for those who are economically disadvantaged, and that is going to disproportionately affect people of color. So I think that's just, one example that I wanted to throw out there is Canada.
Yes.
Canada is the Fiverr Institute does a lot of research on entrepreneurship in these different places where they launch. And in Canada, they have provided a grant to every graduate of Fiverr Institute to launch their company. So they've already made it through some rubric that they've been validated, and now they're being awarded. So I think if we create some kind of measure to say, okay, you're not just mooching off the government, you've actually gone through some hurdles, but we're going to reward you and de-risk entrepreneurship for you so you can go out and create jobs. I think that's one of the things that we do.
Yes, sir. All right.
Okay, all right, your turn.
Hi, thanks. I had a question, I guess for Natalie mostly, in terms of the particulars of how you see granting these benefits, which I think is a good idea, to gig workers. Do you see that the platforms like Fiverr, Upwork, those types of things on demand, administering those so that the prorated share of what the employer is paying is going to those benefits? And then secondly, I see Fiverr as a global marketplace, and so how would that apply to workers in another country, or would there be, this would only apply to gig workers in the United States, or would it apply universally to a gig worker anywhere in the world?
So I think one of the things we have to solve for is the portability piece. And if the platforms are the one administering the benefits and protections, then it's not actually portable. It means if I receive my paid time off from Uber, I'm kind of tied to Uber for that reason. What I want for this labor force is to be able to move where the wages are highest, and to be able to move where the working conditions and the work is most interesting, and not have a negative impact on their safety net. And so there's a legislation in Washington State that looks like this. The platforms and any digital labor aggregator would all pay, they'd owe a certain percentage on top of every transaction that happens on a platform, and that would go into a guild. And the guild would administer the benefits and protections to the gig workers. So let's call it an independent workers guild or freelancers union, many of you are familiar with in New York. They would be the place you go to have your paid time off account, to have your health insurance subsidy, your workers' comp. And it would be subsidized by the work that you do. So the other advantage of that is there's also a form of worker voice built in. And if we think about the 21st century and the growing inequality wealth gap, the only way that's ever going to be remedied is if people who work have some form of representation and voice. And with the decline of the American labor movement, just representing less and less numbers of workers, I think that's going to be a really important part of the future of work as well. And as far as your international question, I only think about American policy, and that is like as big a fish as I can fry right now. How you imagine it on a global scale is a complicated one.
So probably they would collect for everyone, or maybe they would only collect from U.S. workers. So.
Yeah, the way it's being conceived of right now is primarily in the U.S. And for marketplaces like Fiverr and Upwork, I feel like that's a different question. But for companies like Uber and Lyft, it's really clear the work is done in certain geographic boundaries, and therefore you can look at it that way.
All right, go ahead.
Hi, my name is Trisha. I'm a business reporter at the San Francisco Chronicle, and I write about entrepreneurship and immigration, and often where those connect. So I didn't read this word for word, but looking at your main topics, you talk about access for entrepreneurs, and you mentioned living, trade, tax reform, but nowhere in here was immigration involved, and I feel like how can you talk about American entrepreneurship if you don't talk about the visas that a lot of people can't get. I mean, we just had the International Entrepreneur Rule, we found out that that's not going through. I mean, is there a reason that that topic wasn't brought up when it comes to?
Yeah, so I can't really speak to why that question was not included, although except to say that we are speaking specifically of users of Fiverr currently living inside the United States. So
Right.
these are people who are consumers of Fiverr, use it for their work, and they're already here.
Yeah.
So that's the main reason that's probably missing from the question.
Yeah, so I mean, but many of these entrepreneurs are already here. But then, you know, if they can't get a visa, then they have to leave, so. I mean, I guess do you have any comments on the state of, you know, foreign entrepreneurs in the US and things that maybe, questions that you hear come up a lot?
Because you are a reporter and we follow up, there's a survey that we actually did on our seller side of the freelancers that are engaged in Fiverr, where we did ask questions about that, about immigration and about visas and things like that, because those people tend to be a little bit more fluid than the people who are rooted in doing small businesses. So we should follow it up, and we can share some detail about that.
Okay, all right, we have time for one more question. He's been going, this guy way back there, he's been raising his hand for a lot. So come on over, come on over. All right. All right, go for it.
Okay, so in our era, big changes are usually like cheaper, faster, and more achievable than incremental changes. But a lot of our establishment politicians, and especially Democrats, that have a perverse fetish about incrementalism or small changes. So they fail to see the fact that a lot of time big changes are actually more achievable, and how would you help them to see the truth? These are my questions.
Which one of you guys wants to take that one? Any thoughts?
Are you talking about from a policy perspective or from like an entrepreneurial perspective?
Policy, actually both, but I think policy, it causes a lot of changes that enable or obstructs innovation or entrepreneurship. So therefore that like we cannot think about entrepreneurship without thinking about certain incentive structures and policies.
Any examples of that, or?
Like universal healthcare and a regular example.
Well, I'll take a stab. I'd love to hear what you all think too. I mean, I don't think you can have lived through this last election without believing American people are ready for big changes. On both sides of the aisle, the appetite for getting rid of the incremental and changing things dramatically is palpable. And I think, you know, something like universal health care would go a very long way in helping American entrepreneurialism. In the same way the Affordable Care Act, which is a step in that direction, had a significant impact on people being able to leave their job and take a risk that were never otherwise able to do so before. Could do so even more if it were affordable and guaranteed in a way that, you know, universal health care would allow it. I think it's the same with universal basic income. You know, many say it's like the ultimate seed fund that would allow people to take risks and start businesses, or the ultimate strike fund that would allow people to leave their job if they didn't like it because they know they have some regular source of income coming in. So I'm with you on big policy changes. It's just not quite where DC is at.
But I would add to that, as someone who, both of us having had a political background and I've worked a lot in campaign politics and with candidates, you're exactly right. Like, the time is right for big conversations. I mean, Roe just slipped in the middle of his conversation, single parent, like it's no big deal. It's now just part of the conversation. So I think we're right there.
Okay, we do have time for one more question. One of you guys had your hands up. Oh, here we go.
Thanks, actually. It was very similar to the last question, which was, I'm also an entrepreneur. I've been doing it for 9 years. I'm genuinely tired, and actually I want to have some advice as to fairly rational, and I just don't see the incentives anymore. So, like, what advice would you give to an entrepreneur who's just looking at it just very rationally? There is zero incentives left other than this crazy drive that you want to keep producing for your teams, you want to keep growing opportunities for the very people that we're speaking of, who need the jobs. I'm lucky that I don't need to, I'm just driven, but I'm reaching a point where I need to go to therapy at this point, and I've risked everything. I've come out, but I've risked everything financially. And so, and I'm at a point where also now, access to capital, do I want to go through that again? Do I want to risk my home, my family, take on more stress? Like, what advice do you give to us? I see no incentives right now.
Well, John opened, saying that entrepreneurs report everything in financially, emotionally, and I say if you're an entrepreneur or a filmmaker, you've got to be a little bit crazy. So we all need therapy. It's not just you. You're not alone. So consider this as a support group, okay? It's not going to go away. You might need to take a sabbatical or a break or something, but that drive is not going to go away. It's in your DNA. However, in terms of incentives, I would say there's hope. There is change happening. I think this signifies change. There are people who are now paying attention to what has come out of our Mecca. And we'll leave it. There are public-private partnerships that are spawning, and I would just encourage you to be part of that, to tap into the political process. Technology has enabled us to amplify our voices where things aren't swept under the rug. The changes that you are seeing occur around the gender dynamics, speaking to fundraising as a female founder, the reason why they're out there is because people like Reid Hoffman went out and blogged about someone in his portfolio that was being affected, and now it's not like you just get 5 minutes on the news. It can go viral. So be encouraged and know that we are here to disrupt, and that's what we do right. So just, hone into your tribe and your support group to keep your sanity, and just lean in and build that network and go out and change whatever's broken, speak about it, and build that community around it.
Great, feeling motivated. All right, let's give the panel a round of applause. Thank you very much, you guys. We have a bit more time for